There was an attempted coup d'etat in Turkey on Friday. Turkey is our NATO ally. However, the country has involved itself in all sorts of nefarious and unscrupulous activities lately, including the bombing of Kurds, our ally, in Kurdistan, the shooting down of Russian jets near its airspace, and Turkey is believed to be buying oil from ISIS, thereby giving a lifeline and a revenue source to the army of terror in Iraq and Syria. At home, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan governs with an incredibly heavy fist. His Islamic Party was democratically elected, sure, but that's in large part because they routinely arrest journalists who are critical, shut down entire media outlets, and squash dissent from any political opponents. Erdogan is sliding down the path towards tyranny. He governs like an Islamist, and he's instituted reforms that curb civil liberties and destroy economic freedoms in Turkey. He's turning that country into what is basically a Sunni version of Iran. Turkey was once a beacon of hope and prosperity in the Middle East. Istanbul is a spectacular city. It's modern and European in its style. The city is full of Western fashion, European-style cafes and restaurants, alcohol, rock and roll music, beautiful historic sites, and friendly, charming, and hospitable people. It's one of my personal favorite cities in the world to visit. And yet, on Friday evening, it looked like just another war-torn hellhole. Tanks were rolling through the streets, protesters were being arrested or shot, military helicopters were opening fire into crowds, media outlets were being stormed by the military, and bombs were blowing up buildings. So how did this happen? Well, part of the reason that Turkey is so Western and so modern for a Muslim country in that part of the world is because of its founder, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. After the Turkish Ottoman Empire was destroyed during the First World War, the once colonial power was reduced to just a fraction of its territory and size. But Turkey's first president, Ataturk, designed a new country around a constitution designed to ensure a level of secularism and stability in modern Turkey. He wrote in the constitution that Turkey was not to be governed by Islamists and was not to impose strict Sharia. It left the military in charge of protecting the secularism in Turkey and enabled them with the power to remove an Islamist government. And that's exactly what they've done. The military has engaged in this type of coup several times in the history of modern Turkey. In 1960, 1971, 1980, 1993, 1997. And they tried again in 2016. But this time, the coup failed. Erdogan managed to flee before the military could detain or arrest him. He then appeared on national TV through a FaceTime video chat and called on all Turkish people to take to the streets and to fight back against the military coup. He essentially called on his people to pick up arms and engage in a civil war. It was incredible, stranger than fiction. But that's exactly what happened. Despite Erdogan's authoritarian presidency, many in Turkey want their country to become more religious and more Islamic. They began fighting for their country, for their elected president, and against the possibility of a military rule. The military itself split into two factions, the pro-regime side and the pro-coup forces, and the two sides began fighting each other. Police joined in, as did impromptu civilian-led militias. The coup forces were fighting for their very lives. Within hours, it was clear that the coup was failing. Erdogan returned to Istanbul, and amidst heavy fighting at the airport, he held a press conference to state that he was still in charge of Turkey and that those who had betrayed his regime would pay a heavy price. But the military coup didn't betray Turkey. The military is the custodian of secularism in Turkey, and it was simply doing its job according to the country's constitution. But the poorly organized and disastrously executed coup failed to protect Turkey. It failed to seize control, to stop the government from digressing further and further towards becoming just another backwards Muslim state ruled by theocratic Islamist thugs. If anything, the failed coup merely empowered Erdogan to go further and further down that path. On Friday night, we saw a glimmer of hope for pluralism and secularism in Turkey. Instead, the military has simply given a despotic strongman an excuse to arrest and execute his enemies, and he'll likely even change Turkey's constitution to remove any notion of secularism. I predict he will. I predict that he'll boost his own power and enable his government to impose strict Sharia in Turkey. He's going to end any notion of constitutional secularism in that country. And now it's up to us in the West. We have to decide whether we want an Islamist autocracy in NATO as our supposed ally and partner.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.